You can't pin them down, right?
About 100 officers are part of the hostage negotiating team.
With lives in the balance, the negotiations were led by a detective.
At the end of the day, it all comes up to human life. It's all about helping somebody who's in crisis.
The situation in mid-Manhattan is over.
What could happen in Munich could happen at the UN or Kennedy Airport. They set up a team and put in charge of it a New York cop called Frank Bowles.
You have to play their game. It's a street game.
Yes, you supervisor confirmed the hostage incident at 405 East 105.
You're listening to Talk to Me, life on the NYPD's hostage negotiation team. I figured since this is a new miniseries, I might as well give it a new theme. Welcome, everyone, to episode 160 of the Mike the New Haven podcast. We're doing a bunch of miniseries as of late. If you haven't checked out 159, that was volume 9 of the E-Men inside the NYPD's Emergency Service Unit. Dave Brink, who's a 3-truck guy out in the Bronx, he was on the show. Great to have Dave. Really great insight into his decade working in the Bronx. Good memories of some of his colleagues like Jerry Dominguez, Vinny Dans, and Wally Weaver, who were lost on 9/11, and also talked about working at Floyd Bennett Field, where a lot of these E-cops are trained. So it was a good look through his eyes for volume 9 of that miniseries. So we go from that to Talk to Me, Life on the NYPD's Hostage Negotiation Team, volume 2 tonight, with my next guest, who spent exactly 2 decades working the always eventful streets of New York City as a proud member of the New York City Police Department. Joined the NYPD in September of 2000. He'd work his way up to the rank of detective first grade, where he'd eventually come to serve on the highly skilled NYPD Hostage Negotiation Team in the winter of 2020. And ironically, what was his last week on the job before he retired, he made headlines with the successful negotiation with the hostage taker out in Queens. And that is retired NYPD detective first grade Kristian Flood, who joins us tonight for volume 2 of Talk to Me, Life on the NYPD's Hostage Negotiation Team. Kristian, welcome. How are you?
How you doing, Mike? Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. It's been a long time coming, getting on the show. So finally happy that it comes to fruition tonight. First question, of course, where did you originally grow
up? Born and raised in the Bronx in Throgs Neck, private community called Edgewater Park. My entire family, since I want to say probably the 40s, grew up there. My family is a staple there. We have a liquor business there on Tremont Avenue. And went to St. Francis, Deschantel, Lehman High School, pretty much Bronx kid my whole life. And very working class neighborhood. A lot of first responders lived there, police, fire, sanitation, etc. And got married, moved out, went upstate to Brewster, and now enjoying the sunny state of Florida.
Which I'm envious of, because today was actually a really nice day up here. I got up to close to 70, but tomorrow, because unfortunately, March weather here is just very Jekyll and Hyde. One day it's like this, it's beautiful, and the next day tomorrow it's going to be very rainy and cold up here. So I envy you down there in the Sunshine State. I might have to make it my home, when I get my money up sometime down the road. So I guess having so many guys in the neighborhood that were civil servants, would it be fair to say that's what inspired you to take the test yourself?
Yes, actually. It's actually pretty funny how this happened. So growing up in Edgewater, I was actually only my close family and friends know. I was actually a volunteer fireman in the Edgewater Volunteer Fire Department, where I was a junior firefighter all the way up to chief of department. And that's where I really, I guess, found my niche to be a first responder and basically wanted to help people. And my uncle, who just retired from corrections, my Uncle John, he's only six years older than me. So he was one of many driving forces, to take civil service tests, police and fire. And it was funny because I took the police test, then I took the fire test written, then it was the police physical, the fire physical, and so on and so forth. And between having all the first responders in my neighborhood, family and friends pushing me, and I had lost a friend tragically to violence, and as a volunteer fireman, I had to respond and try and resuscitate him. Unfortunately, it did not happen, and he had wound up passing away. That was like, all right, I want to be a first responder, and I actually wanted the fire department at first. They didn't call me fast enough. The police department did, and that's how I joined the NYPD and had a great career. So I know I made the right decision.
Yeah, and, it's funny how that works because I mean, of course, some guys they do the rollover. Which, for those of you that are not familiar with that term, sometimes guys, because it all counts the same towards the pension city time, they'll start their career with the NYPD, but eventually, after a couple of years, they'll venture out to the FDNY and do the rest of their city time. There are even rarely, doesn't happen as often, guys will start with the FDNY, and if they really, really want to go into law enforcement, they'll roll over to the PD. But a year after you came on is when the events of September 11th happened. So who knows? If you would have gotten called to the fire department, listen, everything happens for a reason. Maybe you're not here right now. Who knows?
That Mike is 1,000% true, and it's actually funny that you brought that up because when I was about maybe 4 or 5 months out of the academy on the street, I started in housing in PSA 7 in the South Bronx, and my FD list, the entire list got hired after the events of 9/11. So I had a chance to roll over to the fire department, and I was about this close. And my boss, Steve O'Hagan, my sergeant, basically was like, "Nah, you have a real job." And the camaraderie with the FD and the PD guys, and the good-natured fun and humor that we have with each other. I actually I went through the process, and literally right up to going through, I guess, like the psychological and all that other stuff, I pulled the plug. I was in a great unit with a great boss, great team of guys. And I was like, you know what? I think I want to be a cop the rest of my life. And, with respect to the fire department, great group of guys, FDNY second to none. My niche was law enforcement, and I stayed with it. And I'm, like you said, I'm very grateful and happy I did.
Yeah, Kristian Flood's our guest tonight, retired NYPD detective, first grade from the hostage negotiation team and other units, as we'll discuss tonight as well. This is volume 2 of Talk to Me Like on the NYPD's hostage negotiation team. As always, for those of you that are watching, if you do have a question for Kristian, submit it in the chat, and I'll try my best to get to it. I see my friend Bill Ryan, of course, the co-executive producer of Tales from the Boom Room Profiles of the NYPD's Arson, Explosion, and Bomb Squad. He's watching. Billy, of course, worked with the fire marshal, so he has an idea of what that's like with the fire department. Always good to see you, my friend. So, when you came on, even though, listen, it's a different time going back to that 2000. This is not the New York City of the 70s and of the 80s. This is like New York City at its best now. Things are really, really safe. The city has experienced such a wonderful renaissance, but there are certain commands that never got out of the 70s, never got out of the 80s, never got out of the early 90s. Was that the case out of PSA 7?
I would say yes, to a very certain degree. When I came out, it was actually Memorial Day weekend of 2001. I'm officially assigned to PSA 7, which, side note, I did my field training there as a gray shirt in the academy. I loved it so much. My Uncle Anthony knew some people in the police department, and I got steered right back to PSA 7 at my request too, by the way, I might add. And working in the South Bronx, there's numerous books, movies. You have Fort Apache of the Bronx with Paul Newman, a book called The Wild Cowboys, which was about the drug wars on Beekman Avenue in 140. It wasn't as bad as the 90s, like with the crack wars and all that. You still had a large drug presence. You had a violence component. You still had gangs, the Latin Kings, and later on the Bloods and the Crips come into play. And a lot of these neighborhoods, even though with the modern technology of that time, not so much with the cameras and everything that we have in today's world, they were slowly transitioning out. So it was still violent. The 4-0 and the 4-2 were completely was pandemonium. Pick a radio frequency and it was blown up. And then it was sad but true. I remember going to one job in the 4-2, and then it was me and one other car because the other car had a shooting, and then I'd have to fly from 168 and Webster Avenue to 137 in Brook, and you're going back and forth between commands in housing. It wasn't just one set command, and some of my best times were in housing before the detective bureau.
No, absolutely, and I'll touch on that in a second. But I see somebody here. Well, Keller Prance was here, and your old CO here, Christopher Zimmerman, one Lieutenant Christopher Zimmerman,
Oh.
NYPD hostage negotiation team. First of all, hi, sir. I've heard a lot about you, and hopefully one day, I think he's still active. So when you retire, sir, hopefully I could have you on the show. Hi, Chris. I'm honored that you're watching. You do great work, you and your team. So shout out to you. Of course, he took over, I believe, when Lieutenant Cambria retired, if I'm not mistaken, back in 2015. With housing, it's interesting because think about it. When you got to that post, we're not too far off from when the merger happened. It's only 6 years prior that the merge happened with the housing guys rolling over in the NYPD. And some of these guys are really salty. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but salty in that they're very experienced. They saw a lot. They know what it's like. They know the fabric of housing and that vertical patrols, community relations. They are very, very gifted at that. And the Housing Academy was so unique because it put an emphasis on personal interaction, since you really didn't spend too much time in a car. Working with guys like that who were original housing, if you will, pre-merger, how much do you think that helps sharpen your skill set as a cop?
I'm glad you asked that question. Before I answer it, I do have to say hello to Lieutenant Zimmerman. He was my first commanding officer, and I went through his very first class, H&T 25. So Zim, thank you for watching. Always great to see you. To answer your question, Mike, I had a lot of salty veterans. My training sergeant had 23 years on the job, all housing. The midnight conditions teams, Harry Thompson, Eddie Fackler, Sergeant Eddie Fackler, Mike Flowers. I mean, these guys were like, back then, considered dinosaurs. And they lived it, they seen it. And it's funny, I remember, like, if you got stuck and held over, because I used to do 6 at night to 2 in the mornings. When the midnights came on, like, you hid in a corner and you were quiet. You didn't, because these guys, like, it was like a rite of passage. They would always help you out, always listen to them, their guidance, because, like you said, eloquently, they've been through it. And they would accept you on their terms. And I remember Harry Thompson helping me with one of my very first collars, showing me through the process, like, shut up, kid, do as you're told, the good-natured humor of a salty veteran. And the way these guys would interact with the community, like, I mean, these guys are in uniform, they're not in suits, and they would be able to elicit information, or they helped out somebody's grandmother, or they helped out somebody that was in a bad situation. But then when, like, a shooting or a homicide happened, back then we didn't have job phones. We had, like, Motorola flip phones before Nextels. And it would get these, anonymous phone calls like, you may want to look at this guy, Kristian Flood and Mike Colón. They were out there that night, and the phone would hang up. And then, these people had something to do with these crimes. And how they interacted with the community, it taught me that there are decent and good people everywhere. And it's very, you have to get to know the community in which you serve to actually understand what they go through. And that helped me throughout my entire police career. And I owe that a lot to those guys.
And I think it touches on something I mentioned to my friend Dave Brink last episode, and that, when he came on the job, he went right to the 7.5 when the 7.5 was the 7.5. And most times, I mean, it's very rare that you get that cop that grew up in that neighborhood his or her entire life. And, that's their first assignment. They know it like the back of their hand. And the people feel comfortable with them because they've seen them since literally they were a baby. 9 times out of 10, right, you're coming in there as a complete stranger. And people, especially in New York, understandably can be a little bit jaded, a little bit cynical at times. Say, well, what's this guy? Or who's this guy? What's his or her deal? But if you come in with that willingness to learn, and if you kind of, if you allow them to see past the badge and see the person, I think you already got a leg up, and, you have them at hello from that point forward.
That is 100% correct. And it's funny because, back then people would judge any cop by their gender or their color at times. And I remember that my first marijuana arrest, Sergeant Kip was helping me. And he was like, you're a Long Island cat. You don't know nothing about this. I said, really? No, I'm a Bronx kid, and I went to Lehman High School. And his mouth dropped. I was like, yep, it's a football team and everything. Like, some things were a little bit embellished, but like, yeah, I'm a Lehman Lion, and like, it was like, I went to Kennedy. I'm like, yeah, and we rocked you in the '90s in your football, and it was like, all right, Pop, you got it. And then we actually spoke like men, like at a bar or a sporting event, and we would, from baseball to football to basketball, and when he gets out and this person, will remain nameless, sees me out there, and you get that nod of respect, and your name now goes through the neighborhood. Like, nah, Officer Chris, he's an all right guy. He may not be from this neighborhood, he's a Bronx guy. And it translates to that because, yes, I grew up in Frog's Neck. I know nothing about Webster Avenue, but just because it's the Bronx, you kind of had a leg up on it. And people were very receptive to it.
Of course. And I think that's the key in anything in life, just building those relationships, because especially in the police department, 9 times out of 10, you're seeing them at their worst moment. And so given that, you don't really have that much of an opportunity to build up that rapport, because that's the last thing they're thinking about whenever they're going through what they're going through. But in those moments when you're walking that beat and you're out on patrol and you see those same faces, it's imperative to build those bonds, because they might be the very ones that can turn around and help you out down the road because of what you just said. Hey,
Yes.
He's an all right guy. He's okay. Don't mess with him. Or if they see you struggling with the suspect, yo, come help out my boy Chris because it's going down on this part, of the avenue or whatever the case may be. So that segues into your promotion to detective. Now, the thing about, and I think this is very rare, with the exception of other large cities that have equally large police departments like Chicago, LA, so on and so forth, is that in the NYPD Detective Bureau, you really can go anywhere and do anything. If you want to be in counterterrorism, okay. If you want to investigate fraud, okay. If you want to be like my friends in the bomb squad and go there, yeah. And the list is endless. It goes on and on and on. And hostage wasn't your only stop. You were involved in other units. So getting that gold shield first, what unit did you originally want to go to, and what unit did you end up to? In, I should say.
Okay, so I first was in like a housing citywide anti-crime unit from about 2004 to 2006. And I got picked up by the Detective Bureau in March of 2006. At that time, I didn't have a choice per se because my captain put me in. And I wound up going to the 4-7 RAM, which is the 4-7 squad, robbery apprehension module, or BRAM, burglary robbery apprehension module. And that's where I went to the squad. And I stayed in the 4-7 up until it was like my 19th year. So from March of 2006 to September 29th, October 10th, 2019, I was in the 4-7 squad. And I did everything from gun enhancements, robberies, homicides, and shootings. Everything that a traditional detective squad would do. I did apply to other units, major case. I was actually offered a spot, and I wound up respectfully declining because at the time, my wife, we were just having baby number 3, and I had a great lieutenant at the time, Kurt Lewis, and he actually worked with me, and then I became like the big picture major case guy of the 4-7 squad. So I would only handle certain profile cases and start doing long-term investigations, with other NYPD units, the FBI, etc. I applied to special victims earlier on in my career, but I got talked out of that one because they were looking at me possibly to go to homicide. And then that never came to fruition. And I was just having a good time in the 4-7. I was luckily got my shield, became a second grader in February of 2014. And then July of 18, I was promoted to first. And I stayed in the 4-7 squad the entire time. And it was, I think, around 2016, 2017. Sorry, Zim, I forgot the date. If you're still watching, I got an interview with Lieutenant Zimmerman, Joe Dietrich, Bronx Night Watch guy. I loved Hostage. I seen it. I actually did a negotiation prior to being on the team. Had a knack for it. I wanted to try it, and I was very humbled and fortunate enough that Lieutenant Zimmerman gave me my shot, and I was able to go into HNT class 25. And that was around 2016, 2017. So I was a squad guy, and then I was doing the hostage thing when I was called.
Before we continue, a few more acknowledgments in the live chat. We got, like I said, Raquel Pranzo's here. Alicia B, a constant supporter of the show. And Black and Blue's here. He's got a great podcast in his own right. If you haven't checked out Black and Blue on YouTube and LinkedIn, please do so. He's a very, very unique guy in his own right. So good to see you. Dale, I believe. Dale Peters is the guy's name. Hi, Dale. Thank you for watching. So, being in a detective squad like that, what's good about it, not that I'm knocking any of the other detective squads, they all do great work, is that you get to handle everything. It's like having a deck of cards. No card is the same. If you're in homicide, well, then you're only doing homicides. If you're in a unit like robberies, it's only robberies, so on and so forth. So getting to handle so many different cases of so many different forms of crimes, I imagine it had to have not only sharpened your skill set in terms of your abilities as a detective, but it also sharpened your mind, I guess, for eventually what would come and being able to talk to people, because so much of what goes into being a detective and ultimately breaking cases open and solving them is, well, the gift of gab.
Yes, correct. The 4-7, in retrospect, is probably the heaviest, or during my tenure, was probably the heaviest command in the Bronx as far as squads, violence, etc., case management, and caseload. I mean, we were being compared to like Brooklyn North, which is the 7375, the 6-7 in the South. Like we were up there for a little while before some key investigations happened and a lot of bad guys went to jail. And then we had a lull in the violence, so to speak. But to your point, definitely going into an interview room and trying to elicit information, whether it be from a simple assault or domestic violence case to an actual non-fatal shooting or murder, being able to read people, being able to talk to people, being able to get into people's minds and mindsets and understanding where they're coming from, or at least allow them to believe you're understanding from where you're coming from, so you can get that information out to basically solidify the case or solidify the prosecution, I would say definitely helped me in my hostage career. And as my wife, who was listening in the other room, I can talk and I do have the gift of gab. And it's good at times and it's bad at others. This time, while I was working, it was very good.
It's the same thing. It's one of the few gifts I actually have, because I don't have many. So it's good in that I have this show and I'm able to talk to guys like you and so many others from the PD and FD. Bad because, as you ask my mom, who I'm sure will listen to this later, it's got my mouth is bitten off more than I can chew. Unfortunately, I'm learning as I go. But to your point, it is true. It does definitely help as a negotiator. So, when we think of an interrogation, when we think of questioning, by nature, because of what a detective is aiming for, depending on who you're talking to, it's just by nature adversarial, because that person is apprehensive. Oh, do they have something on me? Might I be going down? Even if you didn't do anything per se, just the sheer thought of detectives questioning you about anything can be scary for someone. So in that sense, going back to, I guess, the gift of gab, as we were just talking about, take me through a conversation, not even with the suspect, but somebody you think might have valuable information. Let's say you're talking to me and maybe I'm a suspect, maybe I'm not. Psychologically, how are you breaking me down, and what words, what things are you saying during that conversation?
Well, first off, it would have to depend respectfully if you are a suspect or person that I'm looking to arrest, or you a witness that I'm trying to elicit information from. So there's two angles we can go at. I would approach basically each one almost the same, but then I would vary a little bit. If you're a witness to a crime, I would want to hear your concerns as to why you're a little bit apprehensive to give information. Let's say you witness, a robbery or shooting, etc. And you're worried about maybe going to court, or you're worried about pointing somebody out. I would talk about, I would look where you live. This could be your mother, for example, or your grandmother. What about your sister or brother? And kind of related to them personally. Like, would you want your family member to be a victim of a crime? No, not at all, Detective Flood. All right. So we both agree. We don't want people to be victims of crimes in your neighborhood. Now, if there's somebody else, another you out there, that witnessed your mom, your grandmother, your brother, sister get robbed or, God forbid, assaulted, wouldn't you want that person to come forward? Wouldn't you want that person to help get the person that did wrong by your family off the street? Well, yeah, I would. Well, it's the same concept, big guy. this person has a family member, a loved one that is grief stricken or hurt that this happened to their family member, and you can be that piece of the puzzle to make sure this person doesn't go out. And then I would reassure them, through court processes and what have you, what we're going to do for you, what we can do for you, and 9 out of 10, I would be able to at least get a statement and get them into the complaint room. Sometimes when it came to trials, it would be a little bit more difficult, and the district attorney would have to a hand to play in it. But I was able to get a lot of information like that. Now, the flip side of that coin is now you're a suspect, and now I got you. I'm not going to come in like the TV shows and be like, throw the book at you, like, all right, you did it. No, it doesn't work like that. Believe it or not, I'd ask the individual, you hungry, cigarette, water. I may even have it in the interview room, like, bro, help yourself. How about them Yankees? And kind of get them in a more comfortable setting, because I already know that they're already defensive because they may or may not know what I have. And if it is someone that is a suspect of a crime or a perpetrator of a crime, I have to get them to drop their guard down. But in the same notion, I need to get that information out, but without raising, it's a delicate balance that you got to play. It's a very delicate balance. So I'll talk sports. I'll talk about their family. Where did you go to school? Who do you live with? What happened yesterday on 169 and Fern? And segue into it like that. And, it doesn't happen with commercials, 45 minutes and a conviction, but, you're in the box for sometimes 10 minutes, be in the box for 10 hours. And then, in my experience, more often than none, I was able to get a confession, or I had detectives with me that would help elicit the information or confession needed in the case.
And I think an accurate portrayal is, I love Law and Order. Jerry Orbach's my favorite actor ever, but I don't think, as you said, 45 minutes in conviction does it justice. And my friend Bill Reiner appreciate this because him and I love this particular show, Homicide: Life on the Street, which aired in the 90s, which centered on the Baltimore Police Department Homicide Squad. I thought that was the most accurate portrayal of how it is. When you watch John Munch, also of Law and Order fame, when you watch Frank Pembleton and Tim Bayliss in there, and Meldrick Lewis, and Bill will appreciate me naming those characters. That was it. Sometimes it would be 5 hours. Sometimes it would be 50 minutes. But the conversation, the gradual breakdown, it doesn't go straight into, I know you did it, and you're going to give it up right now. It's a process. It's much like, I liken it, being a sports fan, to a rebuilding team. The Yankees of the early 90s sucked. They had nothing. They had to build up the farm. They had to draft Jeter. They had to draft Pettit. They had to draft Bernie. By 95, 96, okay, they were a dynamo, and they went on to win 4 World Series in 5 years. Did it happen overnight? No. There's growing pains to it. But the end result, if you do it right, if you play your cards correctly, is a beautiful thing, and especially with this, it results in, justice.
Yes, absolutely. And I like the sport analogy. I was partially Barney Miller or NYPD Blue with Dennis Franz. Those were probably the most accurate of how a detective squad would run in the NYPD in the olden days.
Yeah, great shows in their own right as well. And sometimes, Lenny Briscoe would have his moments with realistic interrogations, but other times I'm like, that I hope people don't actually think this is the real thing. Shout out to Law and Order, one of my favorite shows. So I guess, and if you can't get into it for security reasons, it's fine. But when you recall that time in the 4-7 Ram, what are some of the more notable cases that come to mind that you can talk about?
Oh, absolutely. It's actually, I was going to bring it up later on in the segment, but when I was doing robberies, robberies is where the White Shield, which is a police officer that does this 18 months before his promotion to detective, that's where you start out. Your canvas is where you learn how to pull video. You learn how to do an interrogation. That helped me. That helped me prepare for the squad, because I went to the squad fairly quickly, probably within a year of me being in the detective bureau. I went from the robbery aspect to the squad aspect. And I will tell you, homicides, and the one case that pops out into my head, I was actually just on a series called New York Homicide on Oxygen, which I'll get into that later. The Andrea Caruth homicide. And this was a tragic homicide. was all twists and turns, and ultimately we found her after missing for about 3 days, buried in the closet in her own house, and it was her father, not her living fiance. And I remember having to tell the family that we found their missing sibling, but that their father is our prime suspect. And it was like, it was very hard duality wise. That was probably one of my harder ones. And then my last year on the job, I had the unfortunate task of we did a case because police officer Brian Mulkeen was tragically killed in the Edenwald projects. Not touching too much onto that incident, but I wound up being transferred to the violent crime squad. Met a great guy, actually a great team of guys. Jason Fernandez, my ride to die partner, my last year, Nick Levesque, Lieutenant Gene Ryerson, and we actually wound up doing a federal takedown of the Bloods, and it was all because of the violence that perpetuated in those housing developments that led to the unfortunate incident with Officer Mulkeen.
And Detective Mulkeen would have been 36 recently. I know it was posted. He, in the short time, Fordham guy, another Bronx guy, he went to Fordham.
Yes.
In the short time that he was on the police department, he made an impact, and he is missed. And Brian's family, if you guys watch this, he is not forgotten. He is still very much thought of. And like I said, he is missed. We have a question in the chat from LinkedIn, and I appreciate it. It's from Kadamari Morale Wade, who also showed up to my original installation of this miniseries with Lieutenant Jack Cambria. And she asked an interesting question that she says, Mike, this question or a similar one may have been asked, so apologies if it has been, no problem. I appreciate it in the first place. Detective Flood, thank you for your service and work. In 2014, a piece in the FBI Digest on crisis and hostage negotiation, based on 2012 data, stated that 91% of subjects were male and 38% were married, 40% were 35 to 40 years old, and 39% had a criminal history. Conversely, 58% of victims were female, 34% were not involved in a relationship at all, and 25% were minors. Have these demographics changed over the past decade with the rise of social media, constant communication, and everyone having an instant audience, including live stream? That is a fantastic question.
That is a real fantastic question. I cannot personally speak to the demographics of data because I just do not have that information. I don't know if you're talking just in NYPD relations or we're talking as a national standard. I will tell you though, from my experience as a negotiator, I dealt with Facebook Live on one negotiation in the 4-7, and it went from Facebook Live to a FaceTime call with the hostage taker's mother, who happened to be at the scene. So I was able to ask one of my negotiators, my fellow negotiators, kind of like, he's coming down, surrender to me. Let's get mom off the phone. And then mom waved to me from the side and very tactically was able to get the individual out. I know Lieutenant Zimmerman actually had a Facebook Live negotiation, or he had a FaceTime, I believe it was FaceTime negotiation. And I'll tell you right now, social media does play a part in it. And it's very tricky without giving too much information as to tactics used by at least the NYPD. Both the emergency service unit and the hostage negotiation team are very well versed with social media and can rise to those challenges when it comes down to it, where the hostage taker or the person in question is using social media. We have methods of dealing with that.
And I appreciate the question, Kadambly. Again, fantastic stuff. I mean, that was really, really good. And I'm glad that you asked that question. And, you know, it's interesting because, to your point, I mean, recently in the Batman movie, not giving any spoilers away, what was the Riddler doing? He was live streaming. That was one of his ways to get it out there. So, you know, absolutely. And I'm glad that they touched on that in the movie, because social media is what a lot of people use for better or worse. It's like the newspaper. It's as good as the New York Daily News, the New York Times, the New York Post. You know, and then that's how people, as she said, can instantaneously get the message out there. So before, you know, I do get into your entry into HNT, well, actually, quick point. It's funny because you mentioned emergency service. HNT is really rooted in ESU. Frank Bowles, its original commander, he was an emergency service cop. Obviously, Hugh McGowan, he was an emergency service and bomb squad cop. And Jack Cambria was an ESU cop as well before he took it over full time. So in units like the bomb squad and units like ESU, you got to have a cool head. And I love that they brought that spirit on over to H&T, where you especially got to have a cool head, and has made it into a unit that next year will celebrate 50 years of existence. 50 years of the hostage negotiation team. It's incredible, going back to 1973. So I'll ask you, you know, when you get to that point in your career where, wow, I've been in the detective bureau a while, I have a little bit of experience. It's interesting because if you got 10 years, 11 years, 12 years, those younger guys, you can teach them the same way guys were once teaching you. So in those moments, if they did come around where you could pull a young guy or pull a young gal to the side who's trying to learn, trying to do the right thing as you once were, what would you tell them?
Well, I'd be a lot more politically correct. When I first got to the bureau, I had 5.5 years on. It was 2005, and I remember Mike DePaulis looking at me and like, "All right, kid, shut up," and throws a case file out. Read this, memorize it. I'm going to ask you questions later on. And I'm like, "What? This is my second day in the squad." I actually had that opportunity with the young kid, Robert Solano, who actually 4-4 cop, winds up getting shot, hero of the job, comes to the detective bureau. He was very young in his career. Now he's a first grader in one of these specialized units. And as he came in, like showing him, this is how you conduct an interview. This is how, you know, you conduct a canvas, or, you know, this is how your DD5 should look. And I mean, I love Bobby Solano, perfectionist in every way. And he is like one of these hard charger, go-getter kids that he would strive to do it better than you. And by all means, he great guy. And it was funny watching him grow and then, you know, become this great investigator. And he had some crazy cases where he would want that challenging case, that homicide that was like, all right, we found a dead person in the street with no video. All right, I'll take it. Like, he was that type of kid. And he was very dogged and determined in everything he did in the squad. And he did learn from guys like me, guys like Ransford Wisdom, another dinosaur who's my partner. And, you know, to see that come to fruition, it's humbling for me, and it's great to see, you know, a young guy succeed.
Absolutely. Kristian Flood is our guest tonight, retired NYPD detective, first grade, volume 2 of Talk to Me, Life on the NYPD's Hostage Negotiation Team, a new miniseries we recently started on the show. And I'm very glad to have undertaken. Cambria was our first guest, like I mentioned. Kristian's tonight, and hopefully more guests will be coming up soon. So getting there, I mean, by that point, like I said, as you mentioned earlier, you got 16 years on the job. You got quite some time in the detective bureau. I believe a decade by that point in the bureau. You were in the class. Lieutenant Zimmerman, who's still watching, taught. I mean, again, not giving anything away. What you can talk about, I'll ask you about. What were some of the more eye-opening things that you learned in his class?
Wow. The first day, the actual first day, there's an exercise that everyone in the class has to partake in. So I don't want to give that away, because if there's any potential future negotiators here, you have to experience it for yourself. And I'll tell you right now, it's very humbling, because cops, in my opinion, people I've worked with, are very A-type personalities. And when you put them in a position to where, I don't want to use the word vulnerable, but you put them in a position where they have to let guards down and let people look at them in a different light. And I'm wording this very carefully, because I don't want to give away what you do the first day.
That's fine.
It's an eye-opening. It was a very humbling and eye-opening experience, because you really learn about people coming from different walks of life and different experiences, and you're like, oh my God, I thought that could only like happen in a movie. It happened to this guy, and you know, he works at Staten Island. So, you know, it was very very humbling, and I learned a tremendous. I learned a lot. Is the best way to put it. I learned a lot, especially with the factual space scenarios and the actors that actually come in and they test your metal, boy. Let me tell you.
But to your point, though, there was something that I remember watching in an interview with Lieutenant Zimmerman that he did for CNN with Bryn Gingras, former WNBC reporter, in which she asked him at point blank, what are the prerequisites for you personally? And he says, well, one of the things he said is you have to know pain. You have to have been through something. You talked earlier about losing your friend and having to respond to that scene and try to revive him as a volunteer firefighter. Because it's not that you're picking away at the scab, so to speak. No, it's the opposite. And I hope I'm getting this right, Lieutenant. It's that you can channel that pain, which so many are able to do valiantly enough, to use it for good. Even though this happened to me, I can turn around now and help somebody so that the same scenario or worse doesn't happen to them. And I love that, because those people who have been through the block 1 or 2 times and have been through the mental wood chipper and have gone through those painful moments, those are your best negotiators. You don't want the person that's never had anything bad to them happen in their life. How can you relate to them? It's the person that has been through that, has emerged from it, and is in that position that if you're on that ledge, literally or figuratively, you're more inclined to walk back from it if you're dealing with them.
Absolutely. And yes, absolutely. You have to have some type of pain or experience. For me, I had a witness to a shooting. I'll touch on this very briefly. And it was in the 4-7. And this is the time when Chief Pulaski had taken over, and we had to go out on interviews, face-to-face interviews with DV victims, and a lot of added investigative steps. And as I'm coming out of this apartment building on Bronx Boulevard, me and my partner ran through Wisdom, who I mentioned earlier, looking up, see aviation, look down the block, and there's ESU, there's crime scene. I'm like, we just got a shooting or homicide. Like, radio's working. So we naturally go down there, and there was this guy. We'll nickname him Dread because that was his nickname. And he was a witness. No, true story, Mike, true story. He witnessed the shooting of something that he gave to my partner Wisdom, but it turned into a barricaded situation at his house. And he wouldn't come out. And his wife and kids were upstairs. And this is before I was on the team. And I walk right past the issue like they're not even there. I'm looking at the lieutenant, and he's like pulling his hair out of his head. And I'm like, why does this house look familiar? Like, I just started having a conversation with my partner. He goes, yo, it's straight. It's right there. And I'm like, where? And I'm looking. I'm like, bro, what are you doing? And he's like, I want to talk to them, the real detective. And that kind of hurt the feelings of a certain ESU detective. And he's like, well, I am a real detective. And I walk right past the issue. I'm like, bro, you got to come out. Like, what are you doing? And we go through like this little good-natured, fun talk, so to speak. And he asked me in Wisdom. I'm like, listen, I got to cuff you. I take out my cuffs. I bring them to the issue guy. They're not going to let me in, but you got to come out. Don't have anything in your hands. And we go through the whole thing. And he came out, and his wife and kids were upstairs unharmed. And he was actually thanking us because he was like really nervous. And that's when I looked at Wisdom like, wow, that was intense. And then I already know I was going to get in trouble because I violated everything. Like, I wasn't hostage trained. Like, ESU was not happy, but the XO of the command was there. And he goes, Chris, great job. I'll see you back at your office. I'm like, all right, Cap, no problem. And they whisked me away. And then the lieutenant came. They wrote a nice 49 about me, and it went to the chief of patrol's office, the chief of the Bronx. And I was like, maybe I want to try this. Maybe because I have a few guys on the team, Shane Rogers, Frank Cimarello from the 4-9 squad. So I'm like, I'll do it. And that's when I applied.
And to your point briefly, the thing about hostage is that it's not like other units where you're in it full time. If you're in ESU, you're in ESU. Right. If you're in the homicide squad, you're in the homicide squad. If you're an HNT, you can be in an entirely different command, and on a moment's notice, doesn't matter where you are, what you're doing. If you're available, you put on that HNT cap, literally and figuratively, and down you go to that negotiation. I always have found that interesting. I wonder why that is the case. If it can be discussed, I'm not sure. But I think that that's a really unique thing to where, when you look at the hostage negotiation team, notice for the audience, I say team. They don't call it the unit. It is a team.
The team.
Because,
that is correct.
That communication, you can talk to somebody for an hour and a half, 2 hours. Eventually that person tires out. You tire out. The next man up, the next woman up. There you go. They take your place. What is that at the end of the day? That is teamwork. Hence the name of the hostage negotiation team. So to your point on ESU, and I've covered this before from the ESU perspective. So now I'll ask a negotiator. When you're there as a negotiator, you have so much at your disposal in terms of resources. TARU is there. They need to provide footage into the house. For those of you that don't know what that stands for, it's Technical Assistance Response Unit. ESU is there, of course, because there is the tactical element of this, and you don't know what the subject is capable of. If they lose it one moment and have a weapon come out shooting, that's why ESU is there. For you, how did you use them to the best of your capabilities, depending on the situation?
Well, believe it or not, and this goes back to the trading with Zim. You know, ESU has a he's absolutely right. They care. They don't get extra money. Caring is everything. Lieutenant Zim, you are 100% correct. I guess it's a team dynamic from all angles. ESU does get a version of our training. Our training is a little bit longer and a little bit more intense with scenarios and what have you. So if I show up on the scene and ESU's in dialogue, I let them talk because I don't want to break that dialogue. Maybe this guy's getting somewhere, this ESU member. But at some point, if it has to go tactical or the ESU guy, I mean, he's there as ESU, you have to kind of segue and kind of make your entrance in. And I'll tell you, at first, like anything, it's getting to know your fellow cop. I would always make it a point, even if the job was called off before I got there, I would go and I'd say hello to all the ESU guys. I knew almost every cop in truck 3, truck 4, a boss. I knew somebody somewhere. In truck 2, John Ficini, who was an anti-crime partner of mine. So when I would show up to these scenes, hey, Chris, how you doing? Ray Flood, ESU 3, no relation. Ray's a good guy though. It's a friendly face. It's a familiar face. And actually, Lieutenant Mike Latricia, ESU lost big shoes when that man retired. He was actually at a few of my hostage scenes before the 106 job the week before I retired. And each scene, Mike and I saw each other, and we became, closer, more friendlier. And when the 106 job came, like we looked at each other like, all right, you this, I got this, we're good. And we already knew what each other was thinking. Like we were married at the hip. And it just goes again to your point with the whole team. Yes, H&T is a team, but we are also a team with ESU. And like our siblings, sometimes you have a little sibling rivalry, but at the end of the day, I'm going to do everything for that guy. And I know they're going to do everything for us. So.
Right. And the one thing you don't have to do, at least, even if you're there, is you don't have to go up when it's an EDP on the bridge. You don't have to go up to the bridge. That's their job. They can have that.
I never had that. That is true. I would be down to do it. I actually did it at a negotiation on an elevated train next to Yankee Stadium. So that was pretty cool. Yes, bridge, I think only they do, but yeah, they're very good at heights.
And that's it, because I remember I bring this up a lot, and I wish YouTube would stop being so stringent with the copyright and let the documentary just stay there. But A&E shot a great documentary in 1999, 2000 on ESU, and there's a part where H&T's there because it's some guy, he's literally coked out, he's on coke, and he's running back and forth from the tri-borough in only his boxers. And the guy on the ground, I think it might have been McGowan. He's like, "Do you think a grab's possible?" And Vinny Danz is the guy on the ladder. He was lost in 9/11. He was a 3-truck guy, and he's just looking up. He's like, "All right." And he just goes grabs him. So they are very good with heights. To your point, so that brings us to the most notable negotiation in your career because it made headlines, and ironically, the last one that you worked before retirement. I have the video here, so grab your popcorn, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to show this 3.5-minute clip. It is Channel 4 NBC, Jonathan Dienst speaking with one detective, Kristian Flood.
His pizza, cigarettes, and a hug that helped to end a potentially deadly hostage standoff. The News 4 I team is going inside the NYPD hostage negotiation with an exclusive look at the tense standoff and just how dangerous it was for the hostages and the police outside. With lives in the balance, the negotiations were led by a detective. And this is his last case before retiring. Chief Investigative Reporter Jonathan Dienst has more.
We have 2 males upstairs on the 2nd floor. We need ESU to respond.
Tuesday night, Richmond Hill, Queens, 2 gunmen holding 3 women hostage. The house surrounded, the hours-long standoff underway. Hostage negotiator Kristian Flood is ordered to the scene.
This was a confirmed hostage situation.
He agreed to take us back through what was happening.
They had confirmed firearms.
When Detective Flood arrived, contact was being made by cell phone with one of the angry hostage takers. Cornered, he was demanding to see and hug his wife.
This was a very fluid, very tense, very hyper situation. He did state on numerous occasions that if we made any attempt to come into this residence, that he was going to shoot it out with us.
For the hostage negotiation team, the focus, trying to calm things down.
The biggest thing with that is deflection. Get his mindset off that.
The suspect said he and his fellow gunmen were starving and wanted pizza.
If you can get me that, I'm going to release 2 hostages right now. I said, that's great. And that's when the 2 women came out.
The 2 taken to safety, but 1 hostage still inside. Still demanding to see his wife, there was a delay.
The 2 women came out.
The 2 taken to safety, but 1 hostage still inside. Still demanding to see his wife, there was a delay in getting the pizza. So police threw some sandwiches inside the front door, but the gunman grew suspicious.
I don't trust you, I'm going to send the girl down, which I immediately let ESU know. He's basically putting the hostage between us and them.
As she came down, she made a sudden run for it, police grabbing her to safety. The gunman inside, furious. The negotiator staying calm.
A lot of expletives, double cross came out. She ran out. What do you want me to do?
The gunman hung up and 13 call attempts to reestablish contact failed. During that time, the pizza and the suspect's wife arriving on scene.
I go, still hungry? He goes, absolutely. And that was my bridge point to reestablish the trust.
Detective Flood agreed to personally bring the pizza with ESU to the front door. After getting their food, the gunman again demands to speak to his wife to begin a surrender. But when she got on, he threatens to start shooting. So the detective took the phone.
She came here and like, you're gonna put all these wild scenarios in play. You're not disrespecting me, you're disrespecting her. And I think that hit him so hard that he realized that he messed up. She got back on and she actually yelled at him and scolded him to a degree.
And then the gunman's offer. Both suspects will come out, hands in air, if he can just get a hug from his wife. The gunman and negotiator first coming face to face.
I'm the guy you've been talking to. He goes, you made a promise, right? I said, yo, promise made, promise kept, big guy.
The gunman got his hug. The head of the unit says patience in hours-long standoffs, key.
My guys are very good at what they do, and they can always do it just by talking.
And for Detective Flood, this case his last, as he was about to retire.
It wasn't a matter of, oh, this is my last week, why am I doing this? I wanted to be here. And I got the job done. We got the job done.
In Queens, Jonathan Dienst, News 4.
Now, let me just say before I let you take the floor, and this is, I don't want to say too much because I don't want to take anybody off. If I was a cop and Natalie Pasquarella committed a crime, I'd let her get away with it. I just, whew, man. Yeah, she is something. But I'll let you take it from there. Go take me through that job. I mean, you kind of took us through it there, but what can you add?
So, believe it or not, I was not assigned that job. I was actually the backup to the team. Apparently that night there was no Queens negotiators, or there was something going on, and they had John Bartlett and Eli Rodriguez coming in from Brooklyn. And I had called the chief of detectives because my partner, Nick Levesque, was in our office. We were working on the Moquin task force, and he goes, And I'm like, what's up? He goes, you didn't get a call for this hostage job? And he's reading the 106 job. And I'm like, let me call the chief of detectives. And I get Jens Montanado on the line. Jens was a rookie investigator in the 4-7. He's like, Chris, are you working? I'm like, yeah. He goes, I'm like, and I can hear the phones. I'm like, I'm going to go over to the 106 right now. He goes, that's great. Because I got 2 guys coming from Brooklyn. And it was funny. I was like, at the time, our new SEAL, Lieutenant Mike Tomeo, Mike's a great guy. He actually was in Zim's class with me as a sergeant. He's the new commander of the team. I shoot him a love text like, listen, confirmed barricaded, 2 perps, 3 bad guys, guns, 106 on my way. He actually calls me when I get in the car, and I'm letting him know he's coming from home. So like I'm flying out there. And Nick's driving, my buddy Jay Rodriguez is in front, and I have my job phone in one hand, my personal phone in the other. I have my SOD radio on one. They're listening to the 106, and I am literally going back and forth with everyone, getting information on the way there. It was about a 45-minute drive. We got there in under 22 minutes. Nick's a great driver. And we got there, and there was a deputy inspector from ESU that was like, "Oh, you're a hostage." And I'm like, "Yes, sir." And all right, so this is what we got. And he just like goes into it. He goes, "It was 5, then it's 3. The 106 squad's over here. Queens robbery's over here. I have a lieutenant on the phone with the bad guy. He hands me a sheet of paper with 3 phone numbers. Boss, which phone number is the lieutenant using? I don't know. Okay, where's the lieutenant? Hang on." And then all of a sudden I get like under my arm, and they're walking me, because I was next to the Bearcat, to the Taru truck. Who comes walking through the door? Lieutenant Mike Latricia. And Mike and I lock eyes. I'm being weird. I'm like, "Hey, buddy." He goes, "Oh, with the Bearcat." And actually, Mike started these the facilitation of the 2 women to be released. That was mostly Mike's work. I came in on the back end. His phone was dying, and we actually used that to segue me to get on with Mr. Ortiz, Tex Ortiz, who was the main, we'll say the main hostage taker, for example. There was also, I think his name was Wilbert Wilson. He was the secondary piece there, and we start talking, and so the job was going on for an hour. I got involved. It was 5.5 hours afterwards. So total time, just for your viewers and listeners, you're talking about 6.5, 7 hours of total time, this incident from start to finish. And ESU, second to none. These guys were multiple stacks, tactical patience, and literally, again, when Mike sees me, when Lieutenant Latricia sees me, he was like, "All right." He intros me, and then he's like, "I'm going to be going back and forth, but like, I'm with you." So he would be on the TAC channel with ESU, and we would go through everything together. And he did make several times he made comments about shooting it out with the police if we would have come in. But during the negotiation, and this is where it gets a little intense, there were times where he would handle, or the other hostage taker got on the phone. Then there were times where there wasn't a call, like we got disconnected, and I would try back, and it was just constant patience and talking. And I'm walking back and forth between the Taru truck, and they cleared them, so they had another house right next door. So I was in that house 2 at times talking to this guy. And ESU was always with me. Lieutenant Tamayo, by this time, is at the scene. He's already with me. And all we're doing is going back and forth. And it was very, very, very tense. And ESU, Taru have a lot of toys and a lot of technical things that we have at our disposal. He kept saying he wanted food. But the biggest problem that we were facing was he wanted to see his wife. And he kept referencing, "Well, I need to talk to her. I want her here so, I can speak to her and say goodbye." Now, touching back on my H&T training for a little bit, third party, you have to be very careful with that, because the last thing I would want as a negotiator is this guy say, "Hey, all right, babe, I'm here. I love you. Listen, I'm sorry about everything." And then boom, or he comes down and does suicide by cop. So we find out who she was. We had a team of detectives bring her, and we vetted her. And I mean, we did an extensive background on her, extensive background on him, because we did not want that potential scenario to come into play. And it is very possible that it could have came into play. So between that and him being hungry, and it was around COVID. So with respect to the city laws at the time, certain venues and establishments had to be closed by a certain time, or it was, you had to wear masks and stuff. So we're trying to find 106. I'm from the Bronx. I have no idea, So the 106 guys found, I don't know if it was a Kennedy Fried Chicken, a Popeyes, that got some sandwiches, got some water, and they brought a mechanical dog in, and the mechanical dog goes up and into the house and winds up bumping into an ESU guy, and then winds up breaking. So we have to get the dog out. It's freaking these guys out upstairs. So I explained, "Listen, we can't go in there. It's a matter of safety for us." So the ESU guy chucks the sandwiches in, and it lands at the bottom of the stairs. In the video you saw, the aviation with the, I guess we'll call it the night vision. Mm-hmm. As the ESU stacks are there, at this time we had already thrown in the food. I'm off to if you're looking at the video, it'll be the house to the right. They sent the girl down, and he was on the phone. Tex is on the phone. we don't trust you. You're going to make a rush. So you know what? We're sending the girl down to get the food, because his mentality is, we're not going to charge and hurt the other female hostage, and it gives them kind of like a barrier between them and the police. So, like I said, immediately I'm like, ESU, like, hold it, guys, the hostage is coming down to get the food. Like, and again, consummate professionals, these guys. I mean, the poise to be out there for that duration, and it was freezing that night. She winds up making a run for it into ESU's arms, and literally they hand her. And I've never, Mike, watching it on a training video is one thing. Watching it in real life is something completely different. I give a lot of my hat goes off to these guys. They literally, I want to say rolled, but I'm being figuratively, down the stack to the right into another guy's arms, and literally they shielded her and walked up behind the Bearcat and up the block so she could be seen by EMS. And at that point, Tex lost his mind. I'm like, big guy, she ran out. What do you want me to do? Like, you sit down there. He hangs up the phone. Now, ESU's like, all right, there's only the two bad guys in there, and they're still being calm. They're still being patient and tactical. I'm trying to call him back. And it was about 13, 14 times he wouldn't answer. But by this time, I had walked back. We spoke to her. I think it was John Bartlett, a negotiator, and a 106 squad guy interviewed her, kind of gave us the layout of what was going on. By this time, his wife's there. I started speaking to her. She was already vetted by the 106 and other negotiators. And she was recovered from cancer and then went to remission. And she's here at like 1 a.m. And I explained the severity of what was going on. Like, I'm a no punch. I'm not going to hold anything back, but I'm like, if you don't want to do this, you don't have to do this. Like, but I need a peaceful resolution to this incident. And right now, you could be that potential. And what we're taught, like other negotiators, how to coach, have a list of questions, guide her. I actually have a speakerphone on my job cell. And we were, with her help, we were able to get Tex to surrender. The biggest thing, though, is he wanted her to go to the house. I'm like, yeah, that's not happening. But I'll tell you what, I've been straight with you. And this is, again, Mike, after 14 calls, we finally got through. I had to talk him down. I'm like, yo, your wife's here. And it was like, zoop. What? I'm like, she's right here. Her name is such and such. She lives at such and such. This is her phone number. She's here right now. You didn't tell me there was cancer. She had cancer. And like, he was like, all right, she's there. I'm like, but there are rules that we're going to play by. And that's how I kind of like tactically took the scene back. And he got on the phone with her. But then he was like trying to be a tough guy. And, you know, I'll just shoot it out with these guys. Like he was saying some wild stuff where she freaked out, cried, and ran out of the TH of 8. That was true. So I hung up the phone. He called back. I hung up the phone again. Called back a third time, except to 911, and it went to Lutricia's phone. So Mike comes in. I go, Mike, give me the phone. Hung up the phone again. Now, in a negotiation, I will tell you this. I was comfortable enough for 5.5 hours that I knew this guy was, but I wanted to make that initiated contact on my terms. Plus, I had to calm this woman down. So after she was calmed down, and after she agreed to come back in for round 2, I call him. And the minute he gets on the phone, I said, listen, you have one more shot with me. And I'm like, your wife will get back on the phone with you, but we are not doing any wild-based scenarios, or I'm going to have her go home. Can I apologize to her? And if I can get a cigarette and water, I'll come out. I said, okay. She gets on the phone with him. Mike, it was like watching my grandmother scold me. And I'm like, no. I'm trying to tell her to calm down. She's going in on him a little bit, to a degree. And we got a pack of cigarettes. I got 2 cigarettes. I got 2 bottles of water. Lieutenant Tamir and I go down. And I go, all right, listen, they're going to come out. So, like, Latricia is letting the issue know. So we throw the water in the cigarettes. I'm on the phone with him. He goes, all right. And then we begin the surrender aspect. And his biggest fear was he didn't want to get shot or die by police. So I told him, I go, if you have any type of weapons, throw them in the back bedroom, in a closet, in a bathtub, out a window. But if you do it, let me know you're doing it so I don't freak out any of the other cops that are out here. And I want you to put the phone on speaker, have it in your right hand with your palms facing out, and you're going to walk down holding the phone. And I'm telling Issue's like right next to me. I want you to come down the stairs, but you're going to come to my voice. And at some point, another voice is going to take over. I'm still going to be here, but you're going to listen to him because that was the Issue guy on the door. And we had them come down, and both of them came out, Mr. Wilson and Mr. Ortiz. And as he's getting closer, and again, when I tell you ESU, I cannot thank these guys enough, the professionalism. I mean, these guys are rock stars. Just like I said, the doorman, the guy on the door with the shield, like, all right, let me see your hands. I'm like, he has a cell phone. The only thing that should be in his hand. And he goes, no, I see the cell phone. They have him lit up with the flashlights. Come, turn around, cuff, cuff. Gingerly walk them down. Next guy come, cuff, cuff. Gingerly walk him down. Now I'm halfway up the block. And I asked the ESU inspector, I go, listen, in the unlikely event this guy gets out again, I do want to hold water with this guy. And Lieutenant Tomeo was excellent in providing this. So the video you saw with the hug, that wasn't the media. That was actually Commissioner John Miller. Shout out to Commissioner Miller. He was there that night. He provided a lot of the video that the news was able to obtain. And he was also there watching this entire negotiation go down, a large portion of it. And we were able to create a wall of ESU cops and detectives from hostage and walk them up the line. We allowed the hug. The 106 in Queens robbery was there. And then, all right, you're going to go to the detective squad now. These guys are going to want to talk to you. We'll take care of your wife. And that was the end of the job at like 1:30 in the morning. And he actually thanked me. Yeah, that part, I'm like, listen, you're not going to, like, I'm talking to him. I'm like, you're not going to try nothing stupid. I kept my bargain. Look at my face. I'm the guy you're talking to. She's here. You're going to get a hug. And you're not going to give any of these guys a hard time. He goes, nope. Thank you. He goes, thank you for everything you did. And he was a gentleman about it. And off to the 106 they went.
I don't know how to follow that up, but I guess, it leads to the question because that was your last week. And we'll hit on this before we get to the concluding segment. And thank you immensely for sharing that story. I gave you the floor, and I'm glad I did. I did not want to make a peep while you made it because it was excellent. And I'm glad that I asked you to add more to it. But 2020 was, for reasons we don't have to get into, well documented, was a rough year to say the least for New York City, particularly for the NYPD. Was that what made you ultimately, as they say, pull the pin? Or even had it not been for all of that, were you going to pull it anyway and retire?
Ooh, that's a good one. Good for you. All right. So, God, it got me in the crosshairs there, Mike. So I'll be honest. And Lieutenant Zimmerman, if he's still here, he can attest to this because he called me the following day after this job. Was like, buddy, you shouldn't retire. And my wife was going bananas. My kids had a countdown clock for me. I'll be honest with you, Mike. I wanted to do 25. I went to a great unit my last year with the Malkine Task Force. I made friends for life on and off the job. And I love hostage. And it's fun. When I retired, I was a NYPD detective, hostage negotiator. I don't even tell them I was in the squad, hostage negotiator. And I wanted to stay, but with the tumultuous year that it was, and I have 3 small children, believe it or not, my daughter Kristen was my driving force. Like, she looked at me and was like, you're done. And it was funny because after this, Commissioner Miller was there and he spoke to Lieutenant Tomeo, and they were going to offer me a spot in Intel, believe it or not, after this. And I actually thought about pulling the plug. And I presented it to my kids and my wife because we made this decision as a family for me to leave. And my daughter was like, so, like, what? Take home car, helicopter picking you up and dropping you off on the lawn? Like, my daughter was 8 at the time. And I'm like, you're looking at an 8-year-old, like, that's all they care about. And it was cute, but I ultimately, it was the right time for me. I don't regret it. I do miss my guys. I miss the team. I miss hostage. I love them to death. My brother Scott basically said, because this was literally I think I had like 5 or 6 more days. My brother Scott said, "You went out like Jeter, bro." Like basically, you went out like Jeter. And I'll never forget my last day when I came home. My wife was playing Sinatra. I did it my way. As my kids presented me with my retirement cake, and I'm not gonna lie, I burst down into tears. I was like, "Oh, you got like," I was a puddle. And then that right then and there, I knew I did the right thing. I did the right thing.
I mean, you went out like John Elway, you know, Super Bowl champ, Super Bowl MVP in the last year. I mean, a lot of guys and a lot of gals don't get to leave that way. Injuries, you know, or things like that, you know, or they just went through. I know a lot of guys and gals that left after 9/11. That's not how they wanted to leave. So for you to go out that way, it is a Sinatra-esque exit. You know, if you pitch that as a movie script, they'd reject it because it would just seem too good to be true. But it happened. It's real.
I will be honest with one thing though, Mike. Yes, I was fortunate enough to be placed in this situation because this could have been Eli Rodriguez. This could have been John Bartlett. It could have been anyone. And a lot of guys that join the team don't get a job like this ever while they're on the team. Some guys do. I was very lucky, humbled, and fortunate. And I did not do this. This was a large team effort from Lieutenant Tomeo to Eli and John to ESU to Nick Levesque and James Rodriguez, who got me out there. Like, this was a collective effort. So I know, and I don't want to sound cliches like I'm the face of the franchise. Oh yeah, it was Chris. It was not just me. It was everybody there that night had skin in the game, and this successful outcome I credit to them. I was just one piece of it. It was all the hard work by everyone there that night.
This has been awesome. I'll get the concluding segment in a moment here, but a few shout outs in the live chat before I do. Your uncle's here, John Perigine, and he says, "That's my nephew. Love you, brother. Great show." And he's here. Appreciate him tuning in. Howard Blank is here from Taru. Maybe you crossed paths with him. He's recently retired out of Taru. And Angela Ang as well. Hi, Angela. She's a retired patrol cop from the 13th precinct. Colleen Flood is here. She says, "We're so proud of you."
My
Chris.
sister.
Love you. Okay. Well, hi, Colleen. Good to see you here. Thank you for watching. So it is now time for the concluding segment of this show. It's rapid fire. 5 hit and run questions from me, 5 hit and run answers from you. Are you ready?
Go for it.
First, funniest colleague you ever worked with?
Nick Levesque.
There you go. Second, best boss you ever worked for?
Ooh, okay. So my squad boss, my 4-7 squad boss would be Lieutenant Kurt Lewis. He hit me in for first grade and was a driving force. But I also have to give a couple of shout outs to Chief Robert Boyce, Al Matarazzo, Chief Matarazzo, Chief Jason Wilcox, and Lieutenants Mike Tomeo, Chris Zimmerman, and Mike Falk, my HNT squad COs. Those men that I very influential in my career.
Bobby Boyce, you mentioned the former chief of detectives. How about you come on the show, pal? I've been trying to get you for a while. Come on the show. So hopefully I can have him soon. Third, favorite squad room snack?
Coffee.
Yeah,
lots of coffee.
You need it, especially for those late tours. Fourth, favorite bar or restaurant in New York City?
Jake's Steakhouse, great place in the Bronx, fair price, and that's where I had my retirement dinner.
Ah, there you go. I'll have to check it out next time I'm down in the city. I was in the Bronx recently. Fifth and finally, if you could be at that graduation at Madison Square Garden and you could see all these young guys and gals who are so full of vigor coming on the job now and pull them to the side, given your experiences, what would you tell them?
I would tell them, first and foremost, stay safe. Sign out of your shift the same way you signed in. Be humble, be grateful, and know that you are appreciated. And the work you do does change and does help the communities in which you serve.
There you go. Love it. Don't say goodbye yet. Stick around. We'll say goodbye off the air. My shout out, as always, to the audience, and a special shout out to Mrs. Flood, who beforehand, there was some behind the scenes glitches going on. So she stepped in and she helped us like Jeter always came in the clutch. She came in the clutch. So Mrs. Flood, I know you're watching. Thank you very much, ma'am, for letting me borrow your husband for this hour. It was an honor to speak with him. Coming up next in the Mike the New Haven podcast, retired NYPD Sergeant Jerry Kane. Jerry worked a lot of different commands, worked under the police commissioner when Bernie Carrick was the police commissioner, worked in transit. The guy had a full plate. And if my off-the-air interactions with him are any indication of this upcoming show, it's going to be a great one on Tuesday. So looking forward to Jerry Kane. And Friday, it might be a doubleheader, but for now, I know definitively for volume 14 of the Best of the Bravest interviews with the FDNY's elite, former Rescue 2 and Rescue 1 Lieutenant Mike Penna. In the meantime, on behalf of retired NYPD first grade detective Kristian Flood, this has been Talk to Me, volume 2, that is, of life on the NYPD's hostage negotiation team. Have a great weekend, everyone. We will see you next time. Take care.